From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Tuesday, March 12th, and here are today's headlines. Senator Bernie Sanders is calling on President Biden to block additional military aid to Israel. That's as Sanders accuses Israel of violating a key law sponsored by former Senator Patrick Leahy. The so-called Leahy Law was passed in 1999, and it bans U.S. financial assistance to countries that engage in, quote, a gross violation of international human rights. Sanders told CBS News that applies to Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of children are starving because large amounts of humanitarian aid are being blocked by the Israeli military.
It turns out that Israel is in violation of the law. Stopping American humanitarian aid is in violation of the law. That should be clear. No more money to Netanyahu's war machine to kill Palestinian children.
The Israeli government says it's not limiting the delivery of aid to Gaza and has blamed the United Nations for failing to distribute it to those in need or diverting aid to Hamas forces in the region. A new report from the state labor department found that 2023 was a stronger year for Vermont's economy than originally expected. The department's revised analysis found that the labor force and number of jobs in Vermont actually showed steady growth throughout last year. A revised report comes out at the beginning of each year, allowing the department to re-estimate the trends of the previous year with more robust analysis. But one thing that hasn't changed, Vermont still has a very tight labor market. That's according to Matthew Berwiz from the Department of Labor.
As indicated by the high number of job openings, and as a state, we still have more job openings than we do people looking for work, which can create challenges for employers who are trying to look to recruit and retain.
The newly released report says January's statewide unemployment rate held at 2.3%, the same as December's revised estimate. A backcountry skier who died after a fall on Mount Washington in New Hampshire on Saturday has been identified as a University of Vermont student. NBC Boston reports 20-year-old Madison Salzberg of Pennsylvania was skiing at Tuckerman Ravine when she fell some 600 feet in icy conditions. Her body was discovered Sunday after an all-night search. Two other skiers suffered what were described as traumatic injuries while skiing the ravine on Saturday, but they are expected to survive. New Hampshire Fish and Game officials also reported that a 23-year-old hiker from Kentucky had to be rescued after going off trail and getting injured in a separate Mount Washington ravine. A UVM spokesperson said the university will be providing resources for members of the campus community impacted by Salzberg's death. Pediatric obesity medicine specialists in Connecticut are seeing a surge in children and teens using a class of injectable drugs for weight loss. Dr. Jessica Williams at Connecticut Children's says her practice is seeing a 50% increase in kids and teens using drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy.
The reason that we're seeing that increase is that we understand that obesity is a severe medical condition. There are risks to that patient, and we do now have treatments available that are safe and appropriate that can be a game changer.
But both drugs have gotten so popular there's now a shortage, and doctors worry that some children and teens are turning to medication too fast without first trying diet and exercise. Wegovy is approved for weight loss in children 12 and up. Ozempic was originally developed to help treat type 2 diabetes, but has also found recent popularity as an off-label prescription for weight loss. Coming up, Vermont's population continues to trend upward in age, and that's causing problems in everything from housing to healthcare. That's after this.
The Frequency is supported by MVP Healthcare, offering Medicare Advantage plans made for Vermont and guided by doctors. In partnership with the UVM Health Network. Info at uvmhealthadvantage.com.
Vermont's population is aging rapidly. Every year since 2015, more people have died in Vermont than were born. The wide-ranging implications of this demographic shift are the topic of a new cover story in 7 days by reporter Colin Flanders. He joined Michaela Lafrac on Vermont Edition Monday to discuss his reporting. Their conversation begins with Colin Flanders explaining why he thinks this topic has previously failed to capture the public's attention.
It's a little hard to wrap your head around when you're sitting there day to day contemplating your own aging about what that means for the broader society. But I think we are reaching a point where it is becoming a little hard to ignore. We are feeling the impacts across things like our declining school enrollments, the increased pressure on our healthcare system, everything, and our housing stock. I mean, we are constantly hearing about people who are stuck in their homes because they may not be able to age in place there, but there's nowhere else for them to go. And so across the board, I think we're getting to that tipping point where we really need to be starting to talk about this more.
You go a bit into the history of this trend and where we could kind of look back to in history to see how we got to where we are today. What did you learn?
The one main thing is that Vermont grew pretty rapidly from the 1950s to 2000. Even though we did lag some of the other parts of the country, there were times where we were kind of on the leading edge of growth. We brought in maybe 200,000 to 300,000 people in a pretty quick succession over the decades, and then we plateaued around 2000. And the other piece of that is birth rates. We have the nation's lowest birth rate, and that's only been declining. And as you mentioned, we sort of crossed that tipping point in 2015 where we had more deaths for the first time than births, and that gulf is only widening. And so, I mean, pretty simply, if more people are dying than are being born, that means you're shrinking. And so the only way to offset that is by bringing people in. And Vermont has for years had a conversation about how do we keep people here and how do we attract people, especially families. And over the last 20, 25 years, that it's been pretty stagnant.
Colin, thinking about moments where Vermont's population was either growing or we thought it might be growing a little bit. I think back to the pandemic when there was this moment where it seemed like people were really moving in to the state in a concerted way. Did that inward migration have any lasting impact?
Yeah, I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what the long-term impact of that is, including how many of those people are going to stay for the long term. I think we even know at 7 Days we've done reporting about people who moved here and then moved out of the state pretty shortly after. Yeah. It was a short-lived, and we saw the year after we had that pretty big growth, we only gained about 92 to 100 people the next year. So it wasn't a continued growth. But I do think there are reasons to think Vermont is a pretty attractive place to bring people in the future. Obviously, though, the big limitation, as always, is housing. And I think when we think of the influx of people who came in during the pandemic, that put a lot of strain on our housing stock. I think that was one of the driving forces. So communities are trying to grapple with how do we encourage people to move here, but make sure we have places for them to live when they want to.
And it's causing strain not just on schools, as we mentioned, not just on housing, but also on the labor market. The very tight labor market in Vermont has made it hard for some companies to grow. Can you talk a bit about that element of your reporting? Did you speak to any business owners who are struggling to find people younger than retirement age to work?
I did, yeah. And yeah, this is really the easiest way to understand this is that Vermont's population, the biggest cohort is the baby boom generation, and they are reaching retirement age. Some are already there. And so as they retire out of the workforce, the generations behind them aren't as big. So that makes it a little hard to backfill their positions. And there are companies that are feeling that effects. I talked to a manufacturer in the Rutland area who, after a wave of retirements, has had to shift some of its production out of state. I also talked to a general store in Orwell, Buxton store. Many people probably know. The second generation owner there has been struggling to fill positions for years. And he told us this used to be the sort of rite of passage for younger people to work here, and it's not anymore. And I think there are many factors that go into it beyond just aging population. I want to make clear that this is also just changes in the economy that are going to happen over time. I mean, we know about vacant jobs. We don't know, for example, what those jobs pay, what the benefits are. And so there are many reasons why companies might be struggling to hire, but I think that's only going to get harder as we have less people in the workforce. And the prediction is that our workforce or working age population is going to shrink. One wild card I will say is that people are working longer than they used to. And that's there's a lot of people who are working well past 65, whether because they need to or because they want to. And I want to make very clear here that this isn't to say that older folks and the older population is a burden on society. Rather, this is just a start a sober look at our future and what are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities. I think that's one. Older folks are a really important piece of the workforce and are going to be moving forward. And so the state and companies are thinking about how do we leverage that? How do we make jobs more flexible? And I think they're going to be doing that more and more.
NPR reports that by 2030, 1 in 6 people in the world will be age 60 or over. And I know that for your reporting, you researched some other countries that have aging populations, like Japan. What did you learn from that research that might be relevant to Vermont or might be a path that you go down in the future in your reporting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've sort of explained Vermont is at the tip of the roller coaster of this aging demographic shift, and Japan is years ahead of us, and so we can look to them to see what they're going through. And they have seen some pretty dramatic impacts. I mean, a lot of schools, thousands of schools have closed. Some communities have shrunk from 10,000 to 500. They are really trying to figure out how to navigate this future. One thing I will say, the U.S. benefits from being a place where a lot of people want to come as migrants. Migration has helped stave off a lot of our population shift across the country. And in Japan, they're a little more resistant to immigration. So that's one lesson, I think. Another is just, trying to figure out ways not only to try to resist our demographic shifts, but adapt. How are we making sure that seniors can afford to live here, can live safely, and can live out their twilight years at home?
That was 7 Days reporter Colin Flanders speaking with Vermont Edition's Michaela Lafrac. To hear more of the conversation on the state's aging population, with a focus on the state's oldest region, Essex County, listen to the latest Vermont Edition episode. You can find it on vermontpublic.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Bob Kinzel, Adia Golston, and the New England News Collaborative. Our executive producer is Kevin Trevelyan, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.
At a time when information continues to come at us faster and faster, sometimes you need to hit pause and rewind. NPR's Throughline takes you back in time to the source of the news stories filling your feed. Find NPR's Throughline wherever you get your podcasts.